said before, today we're going to continue the hearing on HB 2196. But first, we're going to allow the interested parties to weigh in on some of the changes that were made and any updates that they may have. So before reopening the hearing or the discussion on the bill, we'll go ahead and get an update from the Department of Labor on the changes that we've made. I think they've heard back from the US DOL, and so I'm sure they're going to want to let us know what they have thought. And then we'll ask them a few questions. Then we'll switch over to the employer side. Department of Labor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. This is Peter Brady. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for providing us the opportunity to speak to the legislation. I did want to update the committee and let everybody know that we have met several times with some of the proponents of this legislation to address the areas of concern we raised in our testimony last week. We've also been working with Representative Johnson and other parties on looking at the contribution schedule, and we're continuing to discuss the language of possible amendments to address concerns we previously raised. I'm very optimistic that by Thursday we'll have come to an agreement there, something that all parties feel comfortable moving forward with. And we do appreciate one of our concerns has already been addressed, which was the technical amendment offered last week, which changed the which claims were non-charging from all claims just to the fraudulent and proper. So we're very relieved to see that has been addressed. Chairman, as you noted, we did receive a conformity review from the U.S. Department of Labor. They did raise 3 potential issues and then 1 area of concern. Our legal team is reviewing that now. And then part of that is also the discussions we're having with proponents of the bill to make sure that any potential conformity issues are addressed. So those are the updates from our end, Mr. Chairman. Myself, Brett Flashbarth, our Deputy Secretary, and Laura Crosswhite from our LMIS division are on the call today, and we can stand by to address any questions that may come out while the committee is working the bill. Thank you.
Any questions for Department of Labor in regards to the bill? Representative Bourgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question has to do with the fraud victims, and it's my understanding under current law, if an individual is deemed to have committed unemployment fraud, they are barred from receiving unemployment benefits for 5 years. So I want to be sure that we have safeguards in place that ensure that an individual is not disqualified from benefits, assuming that they would need to apply for an unemployment benefit, a legitimate unemployment benefit. Can you speak to that?
Yes, Representative, and that's a really good question just because of how substantial the fraud issue's been. And I'll also note Laurel Searles, our UI director, is on the line as well. So I'll ask her to add anything that I miss. The current fraud penalty is for anybody who has been determined to have committed fraud on an unemployment claim. It is a 5-year penalty under the current statute. Now, I want to make sure I clarify this because I think there may have been some confusion previously. Someone who is the victim of unemployment fraud or identity theft does not receive any sort of penalty. That only applies to someone who has been determined to have committed fraud. And I'll ask Brett Flashbarth, our other Deputy Secretary who was around when that provision went through to chime in here. Brett?
Yeah, that's a great question, Representative. So in order for the 5-year penalty to attach, someone has to be found to have knowingly and intentionally attempted to obtain benefits to which they would not otherwise be qualified to receive. So there is a due process set forth within Kansas law that's been on the books, for years. So any sort of unemployment issue, whether it's an eligibility issue, a separation from work issue, or a fraud issue, the initial step is that an examiner or investigator issues what's called a determination, and then both the claimant and employer, depending on the issue, have the opportunity to appeal that within statutorily set forth timelines. That next level of appeal is then to the Office of Appeals, It's a more substantive, evidentiary-based hearing. The parties can present testimony, things of that nature. The hearing officer are in most cases attorneys, and then a more formalized written decision is provided to the parties. And then there's an additional level of administrative appeal to something called the Employment Security Board of Review, which is a 3-person board, also set forth in statute, that's appointed by a nominating commission and approved by the governor. Beyond that, someone would have the ability to then file an appeal on the district court, court of appeals, etc. So in standard times, if someone is found to have committed fraud by the agency and we issue a decision, they do have the opportunity to appeal that. I think as Peter set forth, we're living in different times now where there's a substantial volume of people who have had their identity compromised, and there would be every intent for the department to go through those and make sure that someone who is a victim would not in any way be subject to that 5-year penalty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions for the Department of Labor in regards to the bill? Peter, did you want to try to go over some of the things the USDOL had issues with, or did you want to wait until your legal staff had a chance to look at that?
Mr. Chairman, I can speak to it very briefly, but yeah, as I said, our legal staff is currently evaluating the implications. And I will say that just because a conformity issue is raised does not necessarily mean that the bill as drafted is entirely out of conformity. It's the advisory opinion of the U.S. Department of Labor, and we want to take that into consideration, but we also want to make sure that our legal staff has the opportunity to review that. And if you give me just a second, Mr. Chairman, I'm pulling up my notes. Okay, Mr. Chairman, the issues that USDOL raised in their conformity review, the first one was specific to the provision for petroleum landmen on a contractual basis and a definite employment. They do believe that that creates a potential conformity issue with federal law in terms of that definition of employment. And that's one we're continuing to review right now. The second and third areas that they raised a concern in were both related to provisions specific to the fraudulent claims, the withholding of payment. USDOL wants to ensure that if these provisions become law, that it only is impacting the employer charges and not benefit eligibility. So we may need to make a slight technical amendment just to ensure that it's made very clear in the statute what the implication of those two provisions are, but those aren't significant challenges. And the final concern that was raised by USDOL was related to the 20-year review. Similar to the testimony the agency provided last week, USDOL had concerns about the agency's ability to be responsive with 20 full years of records, given our current record retention policies. And like I said, we're continuing to review those to make sure that any concerns from USDOL can be addressed so that there's not a conformity concern from their end.
Thanks. And so this happened the last time we reformed this bill or these statutes, and there were some conformity questions, but it all got worked out. Is that correct?
I'll let Brett speak to that. I know he was around last time, but generally speaking, Mr. Chairman, yes, usually USDOL will raise these issues, and then we'll just make sure we do everything we can to make sure that the law is crystal clear when the legislation passes. Brett, anything you can speak to historically on that?
Yeah, and we've talked about this, Mr. Chair. There's typically not a UI bill that is drafted that USDO does not raise some sort of level of concern on. It runs the gamut. In some cases, we're able to clarify something for them that alleviates their concern. In other cases, they take this quite seriously. Their position will be that they don't see a way around it, and the bill as drafted would raise a conformity issue, such that the agency would advise the legislature to remove the offensive package or a portion of the bill, so to speak. And sometimes it's an outright conformity issue, or something that they'll just note or highlight. So in this case, they only kind of put one note of they wanted to draw our attention to. The other three, we will have to have some sort of dialogue and see if we can explain it better or make sure we're fully understanding what they're indicating. If we're not able to get that resolved, they would, in fact, their position would be that the bill, the language in question needs to be removed from the bill, or they would potentially at some point start conformity proceedings. That's very rare, and they do like to try and work with states to resolve that, but they will reach the point where they'll tell you it needs to come out.
Okay, and I briefly read through the document that you sent earlier today, and it seemed like they offered a solution on the landman part, but I'm not sure. I guess we'll have to have legal look at that.
And that's a great point, Mr. Chair. They do want to work with the states, and they'll provide alternatives where they find appropriate. So we're vetting it, and we'll offer more comprehensive feedback to the committee. Okay,
great. So it would be good if we could get to that right away, because I do want to. My intent is to try to get this to the floor for turnaround if possible. Any questions? Any more questions on the bill? Any online? Okay, seeing none. Can you guys hang around for a few questions on, or can you give us an update on where we are as far as Department of Labor issues with paying claimants?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we can stick around for any broader questions outside the bill.
Are there any questions for Department of Labor regarding the current situation with claims being paid or not being paid? Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll start on the list of emails that I got from people today. How would that be? That'll take out about, I don't know, 15 or 20.
Well, without mentioning specific names, we can ask questions.
Let's see here. I need help. I haven't been paid since December 26th. I'm on PEUC. I've called, emailed, sent to see if there's some sort of fraud in my account, but no one will call me back and let me know anything. There shouldn't be any fraud. It's me applying. Can you please help me? I'm going to lose everything. Let's see here. The next one here. I'm 3 weeks behind on being paid unemployment. I'm facing losing my house and my vehicle. I can't get through to KDOL to find out why I haven't been paid. Who do I need to reach out to get somebody to call me? Let's see. I'll just go on down through here. But committee, I think you just get the idea. And I have my assistant also, like many of you do, forwarding these on to the website and to Julie McGinney. And I know for a fact that she's done a half a dozen today that I forward on to her. So, and this is an everyday thing, and it's getting very frustrating. As a matter of fact, I think it's worse since we've been talking about it than it was before. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative, it is frustrating. And, like I said last time, I think it's just the fact that this committee is trying to drill down on some of this stuff. So we're in the press. People that have given up months ago are starting to say, okay, well, I think they can help me now. And they're calling in to us rather than to the call center, since they can't get through the call center. And so that might explain the uptick. That coupled with the fraud prevention that they put in, seems that some people might have answered some questions incorrectly, didn't quite know what street they grew up on, or hit the wrong button, and so they got flagged for fraud. And Mr. Secretary, on that, I'm sorry, is the secretary with us, Madam Secretary? Deputy Secretary, is the secretary coming to this meeting?
Mr. Chairman, Acting Secretary Schultz did have a scheduling conflict this afternoon, was unable to join us.
Okay, well then, on that, when you talked about this cross-check or credit bureau type questionnaire, when you first discussed it with me, if they answered questions incorrectly, they were to be directed to a call center right away. I thought it was automatically so that somebody at the credit bureau could ask the questions to try to free up the issue so that they could get help. Is that not how it happens?
Mr. Chairman, your understanding of the process is correct. So if an individual on that questionnaire misses a question that would result in them failing that first gate, they are given the number for not the ks.gov contact center, but the LexisNexis contact center, where they will speak to one of their representatives, and they will receive a longer list of questions. That just gives them the opportunity to further identity proof that individual. So that your understanding of the workflow is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I thought it was like an automatic thing. What I'm being told from my constituents and what I'm hearing from other people is that is just another phone number that no one answers. And so they get locked out of the system because they made a mistake on their questionnaire, and then they try to call in and can't get anybody to call in. Then you take it to the next step where they get a hold of us, and we bubble it up to you and get them on a callback list. It takes, I think we're over 2 weeks now. And when the frustrated individual receives a phone call and then they're told that they're helped, then they still can't log in for some reason. And then they call us back and get back on another call list, and it's another 2 weeks unless somehow we can get a hold of one of you and say this person needs immediate help because they already were on a call list. It's almost like this call center or whoever we're dealing with is not giving us the whole story. I think we're paying them by the phone call, or who knows, but when we get messages back that people are helped, and almost 9 times out of 10 they're not, or they fall back into the same issue the following day, it's extremely frustrating. We're starting to hear stories of people committing suicide. I think one of them did it with a news reporter on the other line. We have parents living in cars with their children. This is what we're being told. It's extremely frustrating. So if we could, somebody's got to take a look at this. It's been a year, man. Somebody's got to take a look at this and help these people. Can LexisNexis automatically call this individual back? I mean, can we just, if they get kicked out, can we send a message and like an email to LexisNexis with a phone number saying this gentleman or this lady needs help, and have them call, so that we're not having somebody that just got kicked out of a system and having to call in and not ever getting in. It's the same story that we keep hearing. So is that a possibility?
Mr. Chairman, I'll absolutely take those suggestions back to our team and confer with our partner LexisNexis to see what additional service options we can provide or we can offer. I will also contact LexisNexis today to see if there are any capacity issues and what they can do to address that. But Mr. Chairman, I will absolutely take your suggestions and points there back to our team to see what is possible.
Okay, thank you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about our own call center. A few weeks back, we tried to figure out how many people are answering the phone. You said there's 430 employees or 450, but how many are actually answering the phone because no one is getting through?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we do have 450 resources in the contact center that are directly assist constituents to the direct question about the phones. A large majority of those are answering inbound calls, but also a population that does outbound call work, specific to call center issues or assisting with issues that are in adjudication. We're working aggressively to see what we can do to add additional resources on the phones to continue answering questions or answering the phone so that we can, get those questions addressed. The other component to this, Mr. Chairman, that we're working as quickly as we can to address is that any of the technology issues that we can solve will ultimately have less individuals needing to call in. We deployed on Friday a large chunk of the PEUC functionality to assist claimants in getting that benefit. So we can see in the metrics that does drive call volume down when we get those technology fixes into place. So it's a two-part question, Mr. Chairman. But to your point in the committee previous comments, we're doing everything we can to continue to add resources to the phone and then put technology fixes in place that drive down the call volume so that we're able to answer more calls each day.
Deputy Secretary, when we talked, I think the first time you told us you had 450 new employees that at this call center was 3 or 4 months ago. And ever since then, they're jammed up and people cannot get through. We have people calling at 8 o'clock in the morning and they get a message that the queue is full and they get hung up on. And then they call and call and call and call. And nobody ever picks up the phone. And each and every time we have this discussion, we ask, what is it that we can do to help get these people help? They're literally dying at this point. So I'm going to ask you again, and I made a suggestion last time, that you just hire people to answer the darn phone. Just answer the phone. You don't have to help them. But these people need somebody on the other end of the line to say, I care. And that I'm not the person that can help you, but I'm just going to take a few notes and I'll have somebody that knows what they're doing in that category to call you and help you. These people need to talk to somebody, Deputy Secretary. So in a month or however long it's been, 3 or 4 months, we haven't hired anybody else for the call center. And my constituents want to know why. I mean, this is not the computer system that you keep talking about. I know that the system's antiquated. This is the call center that we have spent $30 or $40 million on at this point. Why can't we make people answer the phone? Why can't we say, hi, I'm from the state of Kansas and I care? Did you take that suggestion back from our last conversation to see if maybe there was something we could do to help these people?
And Mr. Chairman, I think Deputy Secretary Flashbarth want to share on that question.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, first of all, staffing the call center is an ongoing process. There is literally not a time we're not working with our outside partner Accenture or hiring internally. So that is going on. There's also considerable attrition in these positions. So at any given time, we are trying to add more staff and train more staff. That is not just an overnight process. I hear your consideration on just putting people on the phone. At the end of the day, though, what claimants want to hear is that the issue can be addressed and resolved to the extent that they are legally entitled to receive benefits. We've heard of just having people answer the phone, and we've had mechanisms in place as part of our response to where we did have kind of call center lights. And those function to a certain extent, but at some point in time, that claim work has to be processed by someone who is trained and experienced that can resolve the complicated issues on these because of the complication of these multiple programs. So I understand the suggestion of just having someone answer and say, hi. That person is then going to say, I need to talk to somebody that can resolve the issue. I don't know if that's going to dissuade the underlying frustration someone may have. The second point on that is it is all tied together because they're calling because they need resolution on the claim. And that's for a number of issues we're working through right now. We're working through higher seasonal call volumes. We're working through the challenges of working through the new identity theft challenge technology, which is necessary to prevent the wide-scale fraud that's being thrown upon the department. And at the same time, we're also working to try and implement these federal programs that Congress allowed to lapse. So in reality, there is no easy solution that we have not explored that can make this go away. It is a daily grind to try and put every resource and every possible solution in place to move the ball forward. But there is no simple solution that will automatically make this dissipate. And I understand people are frustrated. I would point out that the Department of Labor employees who are currently here and our partners care greatly about the people we're trying to assist. We have dedicated staff that have worked throughout the last year, day after day, under incredibly difficult conditions. So I would like it publicly stated that the Department of Labor absolutely cares about each and every one of our fellow Kansans who's trying to seek our assistance, and we are doing everything possible to assist them. But there are no easy solutions on this, and it is a daily, long-term struggle we are facing to try and provide those services.
Deputy Secretary, and I apologize if I came across as stating that the department doesn't care. I've met several people there, and I know that they do care, and I know they're doing their best. It's the solutions that are coming out of the department that I have an issue with. And so 450 people or 430 people 4 months ago and still today is not enough. And so there's a finance council meeting tomorrow. I would hope that maybe that the discussion could simply just revolve around helping these Kansas, and anything else on the agenda set aside until we can figure out what it is that needs to be done. We're paying a lot of out-of-state people to answer calls. We've got call centers here in Kansas that are willing to help. They've offered to help. We need to use them. We need to train them, even if it's just a short term, if we can get through this. But people they're losing hope. So with that, I'll move on to my next question on the fraud. There was a press release yesterday, or press conference, and the governor said that you've stopped $2 billion worth of fraud since initiating the stops, or the LexisNexis. Can you tell me how the department came up with the number of $2 billion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that estimate was provided.
I'm sorry, 22 billion. 22 billion. Sorry.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that estimate was provided by taking all of the claims that we have stopped to date from paying out, and then looking at how much they could have potentially paid out had they not been stopped. Brett, did I miss anything in terms of the analysis on that specific?
No, Mr. Chair, that's obviously a high number. That's not meant for the department to give itself plaudits or anything like that. We're always trying to do better. What that number is provided is to show the sheer magnitude of what is being thrust upon the agency. This is not a situation. This is just an example of the sheer volume of the sophisticated fraud that is attacking us on a daily basis that we have to devote effort and resources to, in addition to trying to get people paid. That's why this committee has taken the fraud issue so seriously, and every question you've had on that issue, we do take seriously. I think that we were giving that in some context just to affirm just how extensive the potential problem is here in terms of what we're trying to prevent by that's being thrust upon our state.
Okay, well, thanks for explaining that. So it was just logic, I guess, that you added everything up. I guess that makes sense. Is there a reason that you can't do that on the amount of fraud that was paid out? If you can nail down how much fraud was not paid out, can you venture a guess yet on how much fraud was paid out?
Sorry, Peter, you want that? Sorry, we're here on the fly. Mr. Chair, as you may know, we do have legislative testimony tomorrow. We've been working in conjunction with legislative post audit, so we will be at some point in time releasing our fraud figures shortly, also in conjunction with the LPA audit on that issue. So we are in a state where we're about ready to do that.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So can you update us, if you haven't already, on how many days it takes for our constituents to get through? And maybe I could qualify if we send the email on their behalf requesting assistance.
Representative, thank you for the question. And that number does fluctuate just based on the volume. Prior to the Continued Assistance Act and the extension of several programs, we had a very quick turnaround. As those program extensions have been needed to be put in place and Congress passed the Continued Assistance Act, we've seen a substantial increase in the number of inquiries we have. What we did do at the end of last week and beginning of this week, add more resources to our help desk so that we can address those in a more timely fashion. The goal is to continue to drive down that backlog and get us to a 5 business day turnaround on requests for assistance. It does take some time to do that. There are a lot of requests that have come into our office, but we're adding resources to address that.
So I guess we don't know how long it takes. The average changes is what you're saying. And so you don't have an estimate, just a goal of 5 days.
It fluctuates just based on the volume. Like I said, that's our current goal right now, is to get that down to the 5 business day turnaround, and then hopefully even down further than that. But right now we recognize that we are north of that 5 day turnaround. So we're adding resources to that help desk to make sure that we can get it back down. So I can say that we are over that 5 day turnaround at this point in time, but we're surging resources to get back to that level.
The reason I bring that up is because many of us were told that it takes about 5 to 7 business days for a call to be returned to our constituents. So we're sharing that information to our constituents, and then when they respond back, it's been 2 weeks. It would be helpful for us to understand what is the backlog, where are we with that? And then also on the point of the question that our chairman raised around the 450 employees, and I think you said that there's not a simple solution. They're complicated issues that you need trained individuals to take those phone calls and to answer those questions. Have you considered with some of those individuals that are the 450 that aren't trained for those complicated issues to create another trail via an email? Listen to the person online, type up what some of their concerns are, forward that email. Now you have a record of the items, you can send it to the right trained individual, and that person is heard. So there are simple solutions, just little acts that could be done. That could be one act, is creating an email of the person's concerns so that it could be forwarded on to a more trained person, and then a phone call could be made. So I just feel like we have 165 lawmakers taking calls in. We're doing the work or helping do the work of KDOL, and we're happy to do that. But if we can't help our constituents and it's 2 weeks later, then we need you to help us help them. And I think that's the bottom line, is we have more unanswered questions than, and at this point, it seems crazy that with 3.8% unemployment, that those individuals that do need help aren't getting called back. To us, it does not seem very, it doesn't make sense.
Representative Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point on that last thing. I actually did have an email back that said the response time is projected for 2 weeks, and that was y'all's plan. So if it's 5 days, then you might want to change that in the email response we get back. You said that you're deploying more resources. What does that mean? Can you describe that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, Representative, I'll speak to that a little bit, and then I'll let Brett add anything I miss. So we're continuing to add resources because we've said we've had 450 resources in the contact center. We do have turnover. We have individuals that leave for other opportunities. There are a lot of roles within the Kansas Department of Labor where the career path begins, answering phones at the contact center, and then an individual may go work on special programs or in our UI benefits division or in adjudications. So individuals are promoted or moved within, and then new folks come into backfill. So that's always an ongoing process. What we're doing now is trying to identify additional resources to add net new resources to that 450 number. That's what our target is right now. Brett anything you'd like to expand on from my?
No, there's two paths there. There's hiring more permanent full-time staff and getting them on the standardized training schedule. And there's working with our outside partners to bring more less skilled folks. Because there are folks that are not as fully skilled, but we do need to have some basic competencies there so they can do, again, something tangible with the claim, at least understand the terms that are being used. So that's literally a daily process to figure out how many more people we can try and onboard and bring on, and have the capacity to keep adding those resources. It's just not a simple process of adding bodies. We have to have the infrastructure to support that in terms of the system, equipment, and all of those things.
Mr. Chair, follow on, please.
Representative Croft.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so I understand what you're saying there on the resources. As mentioned earlier, if you don't mind going back to the phone calls, is it possible that some way that we could even just leave a message? They could leave their name. If we can't put a live person there, at least they can leave their name and phone number, and they feel like they've at least left something, because right now they're going through the process, they get hung up on, and then they got to get in the process again. Again, with just anything that could help you and them, maybe that's possible. But the next part is, you mentioned earlier, you said there's a large portion of the PUC functionality that was deployed on Friday. What's the remainder that has to be done, and when might that be done? And a follow-up to that is, what is the next functionality that you're working on behind that? Just so we can help track and see where we're going with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Croft. So to speak to the PUC piece quickly, the functionality we deployed on Friday, we broke it out into phases. Phase one is for individuals that had been on PUC prior to the expiration of the CARES Act provisions, extending those benefits for that group. The second phase of PEUC is for individuals that were on regular unemployment and they exhausted sometime after the 26th of December, which is when the CARES Act provisions expired. The third phase, which does not affect a large amount of claimants, is individuals that have turned over on their benefit year and they may be eligible for either PEUC or regular unemployment. The provision of the Continued Assistance Act allows them to have the choice between those two, whether they want to stay on PEUC or go back to regular unemployment. So those are the upcoming technological build-outs on the PEUC side. The target for that is the end of next week. And then in addition to that, we're continuing to work through our system to find issues or bugs and address those. I would also note, Representative, that Congress is working a bill this week that is a new stimulus bill, and part of that stimulus bill provides another set of extensions for FPUC, PUA, and PEUC. So we're already doing preliminary work in that space to ensure that we're ready to implement those extensions if it does pass and become law, and make sure we can do it with little to no lag time between when the CAA provisions expire and when Congress's new provisions take effect.
Any further questions? Representative Johnson, all the way back there.
Thank you for the question from right field. So and thanks for the discussion. A couple of things. I wondered if there is a report that we could share in as you manage the call center that just shows the call volume, the average length of calls, the calls handled that we would typically see. I don't want to create any additional work. Just would wonder if the reports that are used by the department to manage that might be of interest to anyone else on the committee to take a look at where that volume is and how we can handle that. And then as we look at, we all need this to work. And I'm wondering, are there more resources that are needed from us to do it? I want to challenge, not being mean or meaning to be difficult, but I want to challenge our assumption that we're doing everything that we can. If that's the case, we've got to break down a wall somehow and somewhere, and perhaps we have a role in that with you so that we can get to a level where number of new claims meets the number of cases we're able to process, because right now we're just not there. And I know stuff gets in the way. I can't imagine how hard the fraud was. Just for a few days, it was easy for me to identify fraud in my email account because it said oppose House Bill 2331, and I could ignore it and move on. But it made it very hard to get to the legitimate claims that were in my email account. So I want to understand how all of those fit together, but I want us to keep challenging ourselves to say, how do we meet that? And if we could maybe get a handle on where we are and how we can increase that volume to meet the demand that we have with you, that would be very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Johnson brought up an excellent point. We see every day, we get emails from people who have called 100 times, 200 times, 5,000, who knows what number, number of times they've dialed. Can you give us an idea of how many calls actually get through on a daily basis?
Deputy Secretary.
Yeah, Representative Sutton, that's a good question. And to Representative Johnson's point, Julie and I will take that as a to-do to find a way to share some of that data for any members of this committee that are interested, just to understand the scope of the challenge related to incoming calls. Representative Sutton, I do not have the number of unique individuals assisted in front of me in terms of the contact center. But, as Representative Johnson said, wanting to see some of those numbers, we can certainly have that included as part of that, Representative Sutton.
Right, I'd be interested in seeing, how many are being handled by Department of Labor employees, and then also how many are being handled by the call center.
Yeah, Representative, so that's, I'll see what data we currently have and we can pull to your question and Representative Johnson's, just to make sure this committee has as much information as possible to assist us in moving forward.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, I was remiss, and I did not introduce Representative Burris, who is here today taking Representative Mason's spot, and Representative Burris has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. Actually, I didn't have a question, but I wanted to ask you if it would be appropriate for me to read from an email I recently received from someone who, or excuse me, the email relates to some of the things that have been recently said. Would that be appropriate?
I would allow it as long as you don't, there's no names.
Understood. So the person says, I have been trying for weeks trying to reach a live person in regards to my unemployment benefits, not able to get through. It's frustrating because I haven't received any benefits. It's early November and cannot get an answer. I did get through a couple months ago, only to be told that the system was down and they cannot call me back. At this point, I'm desperate to get an answer. I've emailed them as well and no response. I can screenshot you and show you that I called at least 300 times each day on 2 separate phones. Please advise me on what I can do to get some help. Thanks.
Good example of emails that we all receive all day long. Representative Auerkamp, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brady, a couple points and then a question. There's a reference to $22 billion potentially stopped. I know it's a kind of a guess. And then there's also reference to, I think the governor may have said, 5 million fraudulent attempts since the new software. Am I correct? She's referencing the end of January when there was a shutdown to install the 2-point ID verification.
Yeah, that's the correct time frame, Representative.
So most of those fraudulent attempts that were stopped were done after that shutdown and the new little security system implemented. Your weekly reviews, do you have any, when would the weekly review from last week come out? When do you estimate that coming out?
Yeah, Representative, one just quick point of clarification. So in terms of the total potential fraud stop, that 22 billion number, that references all of the claims the agency has stopped since the start of the pandemic. In terms of the 5 million fraudulent attempted accesses the system blocked, that is specific to the Okta system that was enabled. One of the things that allows us to do is stop bots from attempting to access our system. So those are two separate metrics. I just wanted to make sure we clarified that, Representative. In terms of the next weekly review, I believe that'll be sometime tomorrow morning for the week that ended on Saturday.
Do you have any preliminary numbers on the payouts from last week from the state trust fund?
Representative, that's what our team is compiling today. So they'll have that report as part of the weekly review. Should be sometime tomorrow morning.
Then just on the 2-point ID verification project. So one, I think it's great you all did that. How big of a project was that? And it seems like it had a tremendous effect. And then is there any thoughts on why that wasn't done earlier?
That's a good, and this is Deputy Secretary Flashbar, Representative. That's a good question. So we talked extensively about the age of the system. It's not just the age, it's the complexity of the system. There's multiple interchangeable parts, and we're having to keep all this moving simultaneously. So all these efforts to pay benefits, to prevent fraud, to avoid the system, quite frankly, crashing due to volume, all have to work in sync together. Candidly, we probably would maybe like to get that ID verification a little quicker, but it was an extremely extensive process to work out the logistics of adding that on to the existing infrastructure and trying to mitigate everything we do. There's a balance. Stopping fraud, there's some potential hassle, so to speak, hoops that legitimate claimants have to work through, right? So it was an extensive IT undertaking. There are several states that have not been able to do that to date. There are multiple states that still have not implemented ID verification. So it was an extensive IT build. We actually had to move on to LexisNexis from another provider because they were not able to meet the aggressive timeline we wanted to do. So in terms of IT solutions, it was not a simple solution. It had to be worked through very carefully, and we had our IT teams, OITS, outside contractors, literally working through weekends to try and get that in place.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think first I would kind of like to have just a point of order. I've noticed that we've been in committee for about an hour and we're scheduled to work 2196, which is a pretty heavy bill. And I do realize, of course, that Department of Labor is here to speak the bill. I think that we have derailed somewhat, and I'm wondering, will we take final action on this bill today, or will we carry it over? I noticed that we have space on Thursday, and just wondering how that's going.
Thank you for the question, Representative. Yes, that's why the Department of Labor weighed in on the bill first, and then we opened it for questions on the Department of Labor. We did that because while this bill is important, and it is it is a large bill, and we need to be careful on what we do and make sure that it's right. That's important. But right now, to me anyway, the most important thing are these Kansans out there that are living in cars, that can't feed their children, they're getting kicked out of their house, even though you're not supposed to be able to be evicted right now. Those are the ones that can't call in, the ones that we all hear from every day, all 165 of us, many of them each day. Those are the biggest concern in my mind. This bill will get done, and it will be done correctly, and we'll make sure that it's right, but this is a long-term fix, and we need to address the concerns. This is the 17th, or no, this is now the 18th time I've asked what we could do to help with the call center, and we still haven't gotten an answer back on that. So yes, it's important that we work this bill, and we'll get to it. If we don't get to it before turnaround, we don't get to it before turnaround. But we got to fix the most glaring issues first, or at least weigh in on them, so that it seems to be the only way we can make point.
Will we be finished working the bill today, or will we, if we're not finished running our amendments, will we have an opportunity to continue working it on Thursday? Just from procedural standpoints and from transparency, we have a lot of stakeholders involved in this bill. And
Yeah, I said
they need to
all
be
along that
aware.
we would work this bill until we're done working this bill. I've already had it blessed, and so we can take it to after turnaround if we need to. It's more important to do this right than to do it quickly.
I agree with you completely. I do have a question regarding Department of Labor. Like my colleagues, I have been getting a great deal of casework and a lot of constituent communication, and I've been staying on top of that. Regardless of the administration in place, I always find it important to question the way that things are being run, and this is a consistency that I'm very pleased to see from colleagues now. Didn't really see it a lot in previous administrations, so it's very enlightening. But my question to KDOL is, what is the thing that you need from us the most right now in order to help our constituents? If there is one thing that we can do, what would that be?
Deputy Secretary Brady.
Thank you, Representative Clayton, for the question. Brett, I'm actually going to defer to you. I know you had a really good points to make earlier to the chairman's question, so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that from the agency's perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question, Representative Clayton. I do want to say, we've appeared before this committee many times, and we know the concerns you're facing, and we understand the pressures you're under. So in terms of one thing, I don't think, again, it's just not that simple. But to your point, Representative Clayton, it would be for the continue to work with us, listen to our concerns and those of other stakeholders, and try and come out of this with as comprehensive a bill as possible that seeks to address some of potential issues in the unemployment insurance system long term. That was our intent today. Our understanding was we were going to be here testifying regarding the bill. So I apologize if we were not as prepared with certain facts and figures, because our presence here today was to provide feedback to the committee on the bill. We do value your ideas and input. We do want to continue to hear them. We also want to have an honest dialogue with the committee. I think I said, as there are no easy, simple fixes that can be implemented overnight that will change the course of it. I like the framing of Representative Johnson in terms of not limiting ourselves or not thinking outside the box. So to the extent the committee has ideas or wants to engage in deeper discussion on potential solutions, we would gladly work those offline. Not that we want to avoid doing it publicly, but if we really want to get into details and the volume and the numbers, if there's members of the committee that would like to be briefed in more detail and discuss, how some of these solutions could be modified or could be enhanced, we're definitely open to that conversation. But there is no simple thing that can be done at this point that's going to dramatically make this go away. It is a multi-pronged effort in every sense of the word. It is getting the continued act systems programs implemented. It is getting solid legislation passed. It is getting the fraud situation continue to be refined and under control. There is no one single thing that can be done. And again, I would echo Representative Johnson of, we want to continue to work with the committee and think outside the box as much as possible. But that's not something that's going to be resolved in a hour-long hearing. We know the concerns and we know your obligation to bring them to us, but we hear those concerns directly every day. So all the time we spend kind of rehashing some of these things is less time our staff is devoted to trying to get these issues fixed.
Representative Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to kind of stitch together what a lot of our colleagues have said here today, one of the things that's very frustrating is we get point answers. And one of the solutions that we have to move to is whether or not things are improving. So I'm curious as to whether you have internal metrics. That is, here's where we are, here's where we were last week, and then here's our goal, and whether those could be shared with the committee. Thank you.
Representative, the overall goal is to get every single person that is legally entitled to benefits paid those benefits as quickly as possible. But this is a marathon, not a sprint. There are weeks where performance improves, and there's weeks where there's bigger challenges. The short-term goal, to your question, would be to get those continued act programs implemented, as Deputy Secretary Brady briefed on. Those need to get implemented in the aspirational timelines we set out as quickly and efficiently as possible. That will be a big cog in this in terms of reducing the call volume, because that's what people want. They want to get paid if they are legally entitled to receive those benefits. Everything else flows from that in terms of call volumes, emails, workloads, backlogs. Getting the programs implemented through the technology is what's going to drive a lot of those figures down.
I guess maybe you missed my point. My point is that if we don't know whether we're getting better, then we don't know what questions to ask to try to help. So for example, if the number is 2 weeks versus a goal of 5 days, we don't know that until today. We don't know how many people have called in and not been helped. We don't know how many fraud cases occurred before the implementation of the two-factor authentication. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to achieve continuity and understand if we're getting better or worse. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've gotten a couple calls lately from people who were receiving benefits and then they stopped. Would the department have an explanation to how that might occur?
Representative, we've testified on this pretty extensively. There's literally 900 variations that can happen on an individual claim. There are currently regular benefits, pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, pandemic unemployment assistance. There's any number of eligibility, entitlement, qualification issues, as well as the potential fraud issue or false fraud in the case of identity theft. So without any additional information to speculate as to why a certain particular claim stopped benefits, I don't have a specific answer for you there. They could have ran out of benefits. It could be any number of factors. That's again, the point we keep making here. This is not a simple program at this point in time. There are countless variables on each individual claim that have to be evaluated.
I get that, but I was under the clear impression from these people that it was not because their benefits had run out. They'd only been getting them for a few weeks and then they just stopped. When that happens, do they get an explanation immediately sent to them to explain stoppage?
It depends on the issue. If it's something has been identified, for example, if an eligibility issue has been raised, we receive information that they're not physically able to work right now, they would receive a determination on that. If they've reached the expiration of a particular benefit program and aren't just aware of it, then they're going to receive notification at some point in terms of what the next potential benefit they could move to. It really depends. Unemployment was relatively straightforward prior to the pandemic, although more complicated than people think. But at this point in time, with the addition of the Continued Act programs, along, and then obviously the CARES Act programs that they're rooted in, there's any number of things that could be going on with that claim, which again ties back to how hard it is to train staff to answer these and resolve these issues.
And just to bolster the point you just made, one of the people that was calling me indicated I could only return her call on certain days because of her work. So I began to wonder, was she perhaps no longer unemployed and that's why her payments had been stopped? And I understand what you're saying, that there are intricacies to each of these issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative, would you know if that individual was in the work share program, or would they?
No, I wouldn't know.
Okay.
Thank you.
One of the issues that we had not too long ago was people were getting into other people's accounts and changing their bank account information, and then the benefits would just stop coming to an individual, but the department still thought they were paying it out. And then when the individual calls in for help from one of us, we get it to the Department of Labor, then several days go by, then they realize that the bank account had been switched, and they switch it back and then repay the claimant. Is that kind of thing still going on? Deputy
Mr.
Secretary.
Chairman, that is one issue that has, is largely addressed by the multi-factor authentication. So to your point, that the term that's used by U.S. Department of Labor is claim hijacking, when someone's legitimate account is accessed by someone else, and then they switch the banking information or payment information so that it goes to the bad actor's bank account. With the addition of multi-factor authentication, in addition to just having the login credentials, they also have to have that second component to gain access to the account. So that's another area. We don't talk about claim hijacking in the shared work program a lot because it is a relatively small compared to other programs. But that's one area where multi-factor authentication has had a substantial impact.
Okay, so, and on that note, are you sure that the glitch in the system that allowed an individual to type in a social security number of any cans and have it self-populate, are you sure that you have fixed that glitch? Because I received a screenshot the other day from this week of somebody that had their account fixed, and when they logged in, her name was Mary, and she got a guy named Barry's information.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll let Brett speak to that. I know he was heavily involved in the investigation to make sure that that was fully addressed.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we identified a very isolated instance where someone, happened to enter the wrong social security number and got back other information. We had our internet security officers thoroughly investigate that. There is no evidence whatsoever, any indication that there was a data breach such information was compromised. That's a continued effort to monitor that. I know we have publicly testified multiple times. The department has no information to date, and we have examined this thoroughly, that we have been subject to a data breach. If you've received something like that from a particular claimant, we would be interested in seeing that, because again, that's an ongoing process where we evaluate to determine the security of our systems. So, Mr. Chair, if you could connect with Julie on that, we would definitely like to see the example you're talking about and see if there's an explanation for that or what possibly exists there. But again, we have no indications from both KDOL staff, Kansas Information Security Officer staff, or outside partners that our systems have been compromised.
Representative Curtis has a question.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question, I guess, is either for Peter or Brett, and it's back on House Bill 2196. So, I wrote down when, Peter, I think you were going through the bill, and you mentioned the three issues that you brought up, the petroleum landman, the fraudulent claims, and then the 20-year review. I'm just wondering, are there other things in House Bill 2196 that you all would be concerned about? I don't know. You haven't weighed in on the 5-year on the 5-year ban, if that's something that we need to look at, the change in compensation. There's a lot of elements to this bill, so I'm just wondering if there aren't other things that you all, might be concerned about, or that we might need to have you weigh in on.
Yeah, Representative, thank you for the question. And we provided testimony, I believe it was last week, that laid out our position on several of the provisions. And like I said last week, we think there's some stuff in the bill that's really good that we're strongly supportive of. The shared work program enhancements being one example of that. There are several provisions that we were neutral on, and some that we think needed further clarification. We're working with the proponents of that bill to make sure that those are addressed. And then there were also a few areas that we did raise concern about for possible conformity or operational challenges. Those are also areas in which we're working with the proponents of the bill to make sure that we have language to address those, so that it's taken care of. There aren't any conformity issues. Representative did mention the 5-year fraud ban. I will note that the initial draft of this legislation did not address that in this bill. And I don't know if an amendment's been run yet. I don't believe so to address that, but it's not currently a provision of this legislation.
Thank you.
Further questions? Committee, we're going to have Natalie Bright, I think, address the committee on issues or update on changes. Were you not aware of that? We also have a couple of people online that can chime in, but it was my understanding you were going to be here in person, so, and they would be online.
I am in here in person, and so is Mr. Stafford, who was supposed to be my sidekick. But,
Got it.
We have been working on amendments with multiple interest, multiple parties, and I think you'll have some amendments that will represent that. Mr. Chairman, I don't know how you want me to proceed, if you want me to go through them, if you just want me to be available as you work the amendments for questions.
Well, this would be your chance to weigh in on the changes that we have made and a few that you think that we still need to make. And then if you can remain around for questions if we have questions as far as needs, but this is your only chance to weigh in on the bill and the changes. But if somebody has a clarifying question to ask you after we start working the bill again, you could weigh in on that.
Okay. So as all of you know, we worked over the interim and as we came into session to put a bill together. The beauty about the process is once you get here, then you start to get input, you start to have dialogue and discussion. And so we feel like where we are at today with the amendments is work and input from many others. As the Department of Labor mentioned, we have been having calls with them the last 2 days, or we had one yesterday and one on Friday in regards to what's going on, what their vision is for the bill, and we're trying to work through that. In addition to that, though, we've worked up with several other ones with committee members here, and some of those include, I'll go down the list that I have here, if that's okay. And I would say wholeheartedly what has been passed so far, I don't know if I need to go back over those, but we are supportive of those. We helped work to draft those and had an agreement amongst at least the businesses that we were working with. We are talking about the audit. That's the first one I have on my list that we haven't done yet. We think a forensic audit makes a lot of sense. We think we need to look to see not so much about the dollars, but the breaches and where they were at, and to have a better understanding so that we know when we build a new system where we want to make sure we have that shored up and that as we move forward, we can stay as far ahead as we can on those crafty criminals who have gotten into our system and wreaking havoc. And so that is what we think that forensic audit could be helpful with. I believe there's some language coming on that. In addition, we would like to see this councils remain in place. There has been some discussions about eliminating it. We think it's incredibly important to keep accountability, that this would be a very laser-focused group that would work on getting our unemployment insurance system technology to the best, and that is working for every Kansan, that it works for claimants, and that it works for the employers, and that it works for the state. All of those parties are critical to that process. So we think that this council is important. I think there is a suggestion that it be refigured, and we think the refiguring looks great, and we support that. We also do think a sunset is a good idea. We think that gives us a chance to, if it's not necessary anymore and we've gotten the system in place, then we can move forward and we don't need the committee. If we find there's value in keeping this committee for dialogue and discussion for all of the interested parties, then it can be renewed after 3 years. There was a tabled motion about the data and the posting, and I think that there is good, I think there was some clarification about how that amendment implemented others. I think that they worked in tangent together and the dates and timelines would all pan out once those amendments were both passed. Improper credit to employers at improper payments. I think that that is looking at how, if I believe, so I don't have the bill in front of me, but that would be looking at how we were to reimburse employers. And we think there's a policy decision that needs to be discussed about whether or not fraudulent claims that have been made against the trust fund and how those are going to be addressed, and whether they are reimbursed from federal dollars, whether those are reimbursed from state general fund dollars, or whether employers pay that schedule back. And I think that's a policy decision. I hear from a lot of employers, they are outraged that they are going to be on the hook to pay that tax twice. And so I think that from our standpoint is how we are moving forward. We just know we have to get the trust fund back and replenished. And so as you look at all of those, we would urge you to look at all options to replenish that trust fund. There's a discussion about a revolving account, so that would, as my understanding, would be our opportunity that if funds do come in and we have recovered fraud funds, that money then could be taken back out and back into the general fund if it was used to reimburse those. We do want the bill to be upon publication in the Kansas Register. We think the sooner we can get this started, the better, for very much of the reasons of what you talked about today for the first hour of this committee. And I think it's critical. We have Kansans out there who are not getting their benefits, and we have to get them their benefits. They need it. And, you know, we could be one step away from another downturn in our economy. And so the sooner we can act on this and the sooner we can get a system in place, the better it's going to be for all Kansans. We think that there is an opportunity, again, to reinstate a program that I think was implemented in 2018. It's a reemployment program, and again, that's matching Department of Commerce with Department of Labor, those who are unemployed, and making sure they're getting the job services they need to get reemployed, because that's the benefit. That's what we all want, is to get people back in employment. And so the minute somebody comes on unemployment, we should be looking to provide them the assistance they need to get a job. We have also requested that we do a better job at tracking job refusals, and that if somebody is offered a job that is very comparable to what they had before, and that's been reported to the Department of Labor, that they act upon that and that they go after those individuals and again, make sure if there's been a job that's been offered to them, that we get those people back to work, because that's the goal of what the safety net is for. It's only to help when you lose your job at no fault of your own. We need to get people back to work. That's best for the whole state. I think we have had some discussions about the IT language and the specs and how much should be included in that. Again, I think that's a policy decision. We just want to make sure that when you come out of this bill, that you give that committee the direction to have the best system that has the most secure, most forward-thinking technology in it. And I think that's what I have on my list. I don't know if my partner, Eric Stafford, came back to my UI, if he has any other comments that he wants to make.
She did a great job. I don't have anything else to add, so good timing on my part.
Anyone online wish to chime in before we open for questions?
I do think Mr. Hayes is online. He's obviously been an expert that's worked with us closely on this, has had many conversations with stakeholders throughout the state.
Good afternoon, committee. The only thing that I'd echo, and I think Natalie kind of summarized the broader conversations that we've had. I know Representative Johnson had concerns about the numbers if we adjust the rate tables. I'll just say that I've spent a considerable amount of time in person, on the phone, and we feel like we have a workable solution with the tables that are in there. We contrasted that with past usage or outlay of benefits. We took out the extreme years, good and bad, and we still feel extremely comfortable with the tables that are within the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I did leave off one thing that wasn't on my list, and I apologize, and that's the work share program. We were approached by a company who had some interest in the work share, would like to use it, but wasn't sure the way we had drafted our language originally. And so I do think we've come up with some compromise language that will be presented to you in an amendment that we think will allow negatively balanced employers to use the trust fund, but in a responsible way so that it is not draining the fund. Remember, this would be the first time that we in statute in Kansas would allow negatively balanced employers to participate in the work share program. But we saw the value of it after the CARES Act. We allowed it during this pandemic time, and so we've seen value in it in helping those negatively balanced employers.
Okay, so any questions for the conferees? Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because we're looking at this and coming up with ideas to completely change this whole system, Have you thought about a system like how we have capers now? A board and just have them laser focused on the entire system?
I think there has been some discussions about that. I think that what's unique about the trust fund is it's actually regulated and maintained by the federal government. And so while I think that's something that we could discuss, I just don't know how the perimeters of that would work because the fund is actually regulated and held by the federal government in DC.
Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Natalie, for your input. The question I have, something that struck me that you said is that this is a safety net to get people back to work. And I know when I've talked to the people in Wyandotte County, specifically at the Wyandotte Economic Development Council, they're working real hard. We've got a lot of vacant jobs in Wyandotte County, like over 6,000. It's just a huge amount. And as they're trying to get people back into the workforce, it dawned on me when you said that indeed it is a safety net and that we need to provide people with the resources. And what they're finding are the barriers to getting people back into the workforce is not simply that there's a job there for them, it's more the challenge of they've got children at home and they don't have quality childcare. They have nowhere to take their children if they do get back in the workforce. A lot of them are concerned about safety in the workplace, that still we have employers that aren't, following the safety protocols to keep everybody safe. Now, some of that is easing a little bit with, more vaccinations available, but, and then families that are at home trying to homeschool at the same time they're trying to either work for home or look for a job. So I'm worried as we put all these pressures on employers and we want them all to go back to work, and we're putting the pressure on them to make really tough decisions because we're not providing those safety nets that they need to get back to work. We don't have all the kids back in school. We don't have quality childcare. We are leaving kids in very vulnerable situations, and we're putting parents in impossible decision making. So I'm concerned as we force people back to work, we do need to make sure that we're providing the resources for those for those safety nets for their families so that they can go back to work. So I don't know if I know that's probably, I don't know if you have an answer. You probably don't have an answer. I don't know any of us have the answer for that, but I just think there needs to be a balance and a recognition that as we force people back to work, we need to realize that they're dealing with a lot more today than they were, say, a year ago when people were, trying to get into the workforce. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I address that?
It's not really a question, I'm sorry.
No, but I do think that I just would have two things to say that yes, there are definite hurdles existing today from the pandemic. We need to get kids back to school. That is a criteria and a goal I know of all of you. We need to address those childcare. Those are things employers are aware about. And that's why I think the reemployment and providing that assistance and coordinating the services that exist in the state and trying to help these individuals when they're looking for work could be a very critical amendment that you could make on this bill, and that we could learn to align those services. And I don't want to say force people back to work, but help get people back to work. I think that's the key and the goal of what this bill is all about.
Okay, seeing no further questions.
Thank you.
Well, committee, we've used most of the committee time to discuss what we've already done and to weigh in on some of the issues. I'm going to go ahead and reopen the discussion, and we'll try to work a couple of amendments, and then we'll come back on Thursday and work more. With that, I'll call on Representative Williams.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Charles, if you could provide, or Cindy, if you could provide the committee the updated Williams-Balloon Amendment for audit that we started last week?
Representative, I will send that to her.
I think I did forward it to her as well. And committee, while we're waiting to open that, if you'll recall, there were a couple changes. One was a 90-day change, one was a 120-day. That Charles, you could explain that since you've already explained it last week while they're waiting for it. And I'll explain the audit.
Go ahead and explain.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go, does everybody have it? So, committee for the 90 days, that was found on page 4 of the Balloon Amendment, and it just says that the council, not later than 90 days after the council's first meeting, the council shall issue an initial report. It's just a change from 6 months, so that was one of the amendments. The other amendment was on page 8 of the Balloon Amendment, and it said for the fiscal year beginning on July 1, 2021, and each fiscal year thereafter, the secretary shall post the trust fund computations and data for the fiscal year to the website within 120 days of such fiscal year closing date. So just giving a little bit more time. And now committee for the audit piece of it, if everybody has that open. Did you get it? Okay. All right, so for the audit piece, it's rather lengthy and there are some updates to it. So I want to go through it so we're just really clear. It says the council should conduct an audit, and the audit shall be for the period of March 15th, 2020 through December 31st, 2022. And then it goes on to say that there will be 2 parts to this audit. The first part is what we read last week, which is the scope of the audit shall include but not be limited to the amounts and nature of improper payments and fraudulent claims, fraud processes and methods, and the possibility of recovery of any improper payments. That's part 1. Part 2 is more of the forensic audit that we started to dig into, and I have more information about the potential costs for this and how this could even be expanded up to the council's or the committee's determination on it. Part 2 now reads, the audit shall also include, but not be limited to, an evaluation which provides likelihood of a data breach being a contributing factor to any fraudulent payments, improper network architecture, allowing a potential breach to have occurred, and a timeline of relevant events. Then it shares that it's going to be an independent firm when the findings would be provided. And then there's another addition. Look at a few lines down. It says the preliminary report should include, but not be limited to, an evaluation of systems with access to the payment and processing of claims, forensic endpoint images relating to the claims, and the external perimeter housing the claim systems, as well as an evaluation of Department of Labor's response to claims. So, if I may explain that in this last part where it talks about preliminary reports, when it references images, the forensic endpoint, images relating to the claims, that would be actually reviewing, taking a look at the hardware, the actual computer terminals, and making sure those terminals that are processing claims, that there is nothing malicious being used in it, there are no threat actors embedded in that environment. So that's what that means. It could be as basic as reviewing email logs to find out if there's malicious access to the system. So that's what that portion is. When it talks about the external perimeter, that's the firewall. Since there are many ways to get into the system, for example, if you were to log on to the Department of Labor website and complete an application or a claim, then you would have access. And so we want to make sure that there's no way for there any fraudulent way to tap into the system. So that would be a review. Notice that it says in part that the audit shall include but not be limited to, and that's important because there's another piece to this. And it's not explicitly listed in the amendment because it gives the committee the opportunity to add this, and this is the data mining piece of it. And this is going to cost more, and I'm going to give you some estimates of cost. But the data mining piece would be if they could, and they can do this, if they want to search for any abnormalities in the current system, if our Department of Labor current system is trackable on this, then they can look for abnormalities or anomalies and find any commonalities between, let's say, different claim numbers going to one bank account. And they could track that and find out how many unique original claims went to one, for example, bank account. So they could actually do that. If our system didn't allow for that, didn't track all those digital electronic accounts, then they would be able to recreate the data on their own system. So what would the cost difference be? For the whole audit, the estimation would be around, without the data mining, would be approximately $40,000. To give you an idea, the LPA, Legislative Post Audit, is between $100,000 and $150,000 built into our budget annually per long audit. And so we do 10 to 12 to 15 of those a year. So that gives you an idea that this is different and overlapping of the LPA audit, but not as expensive. Now, if you add the data mining on, then that adds anywhere between $40,000 to $110,000, depending on whether or not they need to recreate the system in order to find out. But all of these things are possibilities. It doesn't require it. It says that these things, there's a scope that's provided in the amendment, but it doesn't necessarily take into account all of the things I mentioned. I just wanted to provide it. So I'll stand for questions, and that's my motion.
Charles, did you have anything else to add to that, or was that sufficient?
No, Chairman, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, the motion is seconded by Representative Long. Representative Clayton, and then Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative, just have some questions in regards to this. Regarding the cost of the audit, what is your source for determining that?
Well, thank you for the question, but whenever we write statutes, we do not recommend a vendor. We don't set forth stipulations that would lead toward one vendor or another. So I did talk to individuals in that arena, but I think it would be inappropriate to mention a vendor's name.
Okay, so we don't have a source. Will this be no bid contract? How will
Representative,
that
go
be
ahead and give her
determined?
the name.
Spear Tip.
Okay, we have a source.
All right, and so no bid contract, who determines this? How is it decided?
Well, it would be decided by the committee and the committee that we're constructing in this bill.
All right, so they would make this determination how often we would be giving them this power to spend this money. And of course, we would still be able to determine whether that was added into our annual budgets through the Appropriations Committee, correct?
Yes, the amendment says the audit shall be paid
For by the state subject to appropriations, therefore, yes. Again, I do appreciate you taking the time to do the research, but the implication in here is implying that data breaches have taken place. I do not necessarily believe that, and I'm not inclined to support anything that, again, tends to run up our budget at a time when we desperately need state general fund money in order to support these very people that we are helping and getting emails on. I understand that we need to make points here, but I think that we can make points by tightening our belts, because heaven knows our constituents have had to do so as well. I will be still voting no.
Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I understanding this correctly? You were talking for an LPA audit, and then you're contrasting that with another audit that will do the data mining, is that correct?
This audit has two parts to it. One, the second part, the more forensics part, is not something that LPA will be diving into. I will note that the June audit, there are some increased capabilities that our legislative post audit will be able to do that they have not been able to do it in the past. And I will be provided a little bit more briefing on that tomorrow. But they are somewhat, there is some overlap, but not complete overlap. In addition, it provides an additional year.
Second part of that within this bill, do we have then a requirement for the agency then to have a yearly audit and report structure?
It's not an annual. This is just a one-time audit.
I understand that, but when we're designing this system, anybody that handles money, we require of them an annual report to the committee. But that's not within this piece right here.
No, it is not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Auerkamp.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak very briefly on support of the amendment. Talking to business owners about the fraud situation and certainly all the claims coming out. They are very upset, and there is a lack of trust, and they are furious, to put it bluntly, and they want to get to the bottom of it. They want to make sure we get to the bottom of it, and anything we can do to help understand what happened, not only kind of give some clarity to what happened in the past, but also, I think it was mentioned earlier, it helps us understand the fraud better so we can prevent it in the future and hopefully regain the trust of the Kansas businesses. So thank you for bringing the amendment, Representative Williams. I will support it.
Seeing no further questions, Representative, I'm sorry, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Williams, I'm a little slow. And so I got lost on the dates because on the one hand, we talk about it's going to cover a period through December 31st, 2022, but we're going to be expecting a preliminary report before then. That's where I got lost. Can you go over that again, please?
Sure. So basically, the time frame is between March of 2020 until December of 2022. The dates that'll actually, the final report will be September 1st, 2022. If there's an additional monitoring until December 31st, 2022, then it's in there. It gives room in case that the report is not complete.
Didn't work out well. I'm more confused, sorry.
I don't know if I can help you, but the dates are clearly in there. The date for the final report is, you're correct, it's several months prior to December 31st, but it gives them the ability to have that full time period to assess and to evaluate. Even if they're not reporting on it, that they still have the ability to use that data, and that is data that can be incorporated and shared in any way that they deem necessary.
Well, I repeat, I guess I'm just slow, but I don't see how you can have a final report before the period being audited is even over. But that's just me. Thank you.
Representative Burrows, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a while. I've had a few, so I'm going to try to play catch up here if I may. First, in response to the audit request, Mr. Chairman, I'm a little confused in reference to, first of all, in this bill, we have a commission that it will be established, and it will be their responsibility to, I would assume, through the guidelines set forth within the bill itself, to determine what direction the Department of Labor should move. I think it's my opinion we're being a little heavy-handed here. We're not allowing that commission, should this bill pass, be the guiding team for the Department of Labor. It's going to be a bipartisan group, one that has some guidelines in place. But I'm along with the other representative made comment, I'm concerned about the perception that there's been a breach on the state's end, and that I don't believe is the case. And it's those types of things that are slowing us down in getting the tools necessary for the Department of Labor to move through and get the money out to our constituents. We're really creating a heavy bill here, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your patience. I know we want to get this right, but if we're going to continue to load this thing down with those things that may actually be more of a burden, I would just as soon leave it up to the commission that's been appointed in the bill to make the decisions necessary as to what direction we need to go with the department. So I won't be supporting the amendment, and I do believe, I go back to my original comment, I do believe that legislative post-audit would be able to determine if there has been a breach, and it would be at no additional cost to the agency and or to the general fund, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. So we have been informed by the Department of Labor that, in their opinion, there hasn't been a breach. However, we have video evidence of a breach, and we have emails. We have emails that were sent, at least to me, of screenshots of other people's information in their portal, or portals being mixed up. We have bank accounts being changed, people hacking into changing bank accounts somehow. Now, there may not have been a breach, but a lot of people on this committee seem to think there was a breach, and that's just the reality of it. And if there was a breach, we want to know about it. We want to know the extent of it. We want to know how many Kansans were hurt so that we can help them. And so that's why I'll support this amendment. Anything? Seeing no further questions, Representative, you can close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just add that the legislative post-audit is not in either of their audits conducting anything related to breach. And if you will also note that the wording is an evaluation which provides likelihood of a data breach. If there is no likelihood, they can find no trace of a breach, then there's no need to go any further, and then that settles the matter. But we don't know that. And with the governor saying that $22 billion of fraudulent claims have been potentially stopped, that makes me wonder how many millions of dollars were not stopped. And as of today, February 23rd, we still don't know. So what's to say that a month from now that we have that answer, or 2 months from now that we have that answer? We don't have any guarantees that we will get that answer. And in terms of the breach, our legislative post-audit will not be able to identify that type of forensic information. Therefore, this type of audit provides the clarity for future building of a system, and gives us clarity of what happened in the past. And we owe Kansans the truth of what happened. So I ask you to support the amendment. I close.
Committee, you've heard the motion seconded by Representative Long. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no.
No.
Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion passes. Okay, committee, we are 15 minutes over, so we're going to go ahead and adjourn. But first, we do have 2 bill hearings tomorrow. I do plan to take up this unemployment bill again on Thursday, and so we will not have people weighing in or get an update from the Department of Labor so that we can get to work on the bill on Thursday. Thank you. We're adjourned.